and pass it over to Dave Helene.
Thanks, Michelle, and good morning, everyone. My name is Dave Helene. I'm the Transportation Alternatives Program Manager with MDT. Just a little bit of background about me. I've been with MDT for about 16 years now, and almost 10 years in the previously the CTEP program and now the TA program. So kind of been involved since the inception of TA, and yeah, it's been fun to see all the projects and be involved in project development, but really looking forward to this new round of funding that we have coming up, and looking forward to being here today to tell you about the TA program. So we'll get into it if my computer will work. There we go. All right. Yeah, I'm here obviously to tell you more about the program. Glad to see there's a decent turnout for this. Kind of here to talk about how you can apply, and discuss the application and the scoring criteria. First, I'm going to go through the changes for this year, and then go over some of the basics of the program, and then walk through what is required for both the capital improvement and payment preservation applications. As Michelle said earlier, please feel free to type in any questions that you have in the question and answer section, and then we'll get to those at the end. Just kind of get through everything, and then we'll go through the questions at the end. And also you can ask questions verbally as well. You can unmute, but please wait until the end for that. So I guess first up, obviously the call for applications has been announced. It was announced on January 6th, and the deadline is April 12th, 2023. So obviously good amount of time left in the application cycle. So yeah, April 12th, 2023 at 3 p.m. And I can talk about that later, how to submit applications, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I want to go through, first of all, the changes for 2023. First thing to discuss is there's been some minor changes to the application. If you've had a chance to go through that, you've maybe noticed some of those already, but there's no real major changes. They're mostly small tweaks, and if you've been involved before with an application, you'll still see the project benefits and the risk analysis, the project description. So nothing hugely new, just kind of some minor tweaks is all. So again, I'll go through each of those applications later. One of the more major changes this year is a new funding category. So there's actually a new population category for the population from 50,000 to 200,000 population areas. So in Montana, these are called the MPO areas, or the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, that fall into this population category. The three MPOs that we have here in Montana are Billings, Missoula, and Great Falls. They're over that 50,000 population mark. They have dedicated funding for that population area. I'll get into those here in a little bit. Let's see here. So essentially, we kind of have three population categories. So we have that 50 to 200,000 population category, and then we have the 5,000 to 50,000 population category, and then there's the under 5,000 population, which is also combined with all areas funding. So it's a little bit confusing, but I'll get into that here in the next slide. So MDT will still strive to award projects, also based on geographical distribution, for balance, and then urban rural distribution as well, while still adhering to the funding requirements from FHWA. So in addition to that 50,000 to 200,000 population area funding for the MPOs, the new highway bill also allows for the MPO areas to administer their own selection process. And also the MPO itself is an eligible applicant. So if your organization is within those urban areas, Billings, Missoula, or Great Falls, and you're planning to apply for TA, I'll stress, do not apply with the MDT process, as we will not consider your application. Those three MPOs, Billings, Missoula, and Great Falls, will be administering their own process. They have websites, and I can point you in the right direction there. So yeah, MDT is just administering the 5,000 to 50,000 category, and the below 5,000 in all areas category. So again, kind of a big change this year, but that's that. I'll move on. I guess one more thing about the MPO is, the call for applications for those areas is currently live as well. They're lining up basically exactly with the MDT process to kind of keep things kind of on the same page with funding. Their deadline is also April 12th. Again, they have their own application scoring criteria. They are somewhat similar to MDT's application and scoring criteria. It's nothing crazy or different, but it is slightly different. They also have their own committee for scoring and selecting projects. Once the MPO goes through their scoring of the projects, just like MDT will, they'll turn that list basically over to MDT for final approval, and then MDT Transportation Commission approval as well. And the one final change that I'll point out this year is that MDT is allowing for reimbursement for applications for just communities that have a population of less than 5,000, kind of the rural areas, and also tribal entities. So if you're either of those, then yeah, you'll qualify for that application reimbursement. So that's a little different than when you're applying, but it's actually the area is less than 5,000. So a little bit confusing. If you have questions on that, we can chat about that later. Feel free to ask. But there's a whole document on our website that kind of walks through all the requirements for that reimbursement. So moving along, I wanted to just highlight some of the funding amounts today. Again, nothing really new here. If you spend some time on our website, kind of learning about kind of the changes, but just wanted to highlight some of these things. So as you can see here, for capital improvement application, we have a funding limit of 3 million. And then for the pavement preservation application, a funding limit of 600,000. Those are increased from the last go around because we do have more funding this year. As you can see, we have 30 million total between all the areas. So we increased the size of the project limits. So just to point out that your overall application can exceed these amounts. It's just the TA funding request can exceed the 3 million and 600,000 respectively for each application. And the way that you could exceed those limits is by adding in local match or state match or local additional things of that nature. Yeah, and you can see the funding categories that are below. There is the capital improvement amounts. They're broken out between that less than 5,000 population area and all areas at that 10.2 million funding. And then the capital improvement for the 5,000 to 50,000, there is that 3.6 million. Just so there was a question on this earlier, one or two, someone from an area of the 5,000 to 50,000 was wondering if that was the only money available to them for a capital improvement project, and that is not the case. It's there'll be kind of the way to think about it is that 10.2 million plus the 3.6, so 13.8 million for capital improvements statewide. We just have to, MDT just has to make sure that at least that 3.6 million needs to go to the 5,000 to 50,000 population areas. And, that's kind of a sort of a small slice of that pie out of that 13.8 million. We'll have to see obviously how the applications shake out, but historically it's been a fairly even mix between rural, like below 5,000 population areas and that 5 to 50. So I guess the answer to that question, if others have that, is the way to think about it is kind of that total amount for capital improvement. So again, kind of confusing. Same goes for pavement preservation there, 1.1 million for the less than 5,000 population in all areas, and then the 5,000 to 50,000, 400,000. So adding those together, we get about 1.5 million total. And as you can see, the MPO funding for the 50,000 to 200,000 population areas is about 14.5 million. And you can see it broken down there for Billings 3.4, Great Falls 3.6, and Missoula about 4.5 million. Add all those up and you get that 30 million funding total. Moving along, just going to kind of go over fairly quickly the eligible applicants. This is probably nothing new for most of you, but just to go over it. So eligible applicants going to be local governments, so city governments, county governments, tribal governments, school districts are also eligible. The MPOs, just talked about them. They want to apply, they can apply through their own process. Transit agencies are eligible, natural resource agencies. So nonprofits are actually eligible federally, but we're not, for the state, they're ineligible. However, they certainly can partner with a different eligible entity, whether that's a local government, tribal government. So they could still be involved in the process. We just can't enter into agreements with nonprofits. The state of Montana can't. So it needs to kind of come from one of these other governmental entities. But if a nonprofit is interested, get in touch with your city, county, whatever local government, or whatever other eligible entity makes sense, and you can be involved that way. The nonprofit can still pay the match kind of behind the scenes and be involved in project development, all that kind of stuff. So I guess an example of that could be like a land trust that might want to develop a shared use path, something like that. Could partner with a county if they're on board. Moving along to eligible projects. There are a full, complete list of eligible projects on our website. There's a few sort of other categories here, kind of non-typical ones that we haven't really seen many applications from. So go check those out on our website. We've funded these types of projects in the past, and these are the ones that tend to score well with how our application is set up. So again, there's a few other like scenic turnouts and environmental type eligible projects. So check those out on our website. Kind of the more the typical projects that we see are new sidewalks, new shared use paths, also known as bike paths, pavement preservation of paths, sidewalk repair, Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA upgrades. These are going to be your curb ramps. You can see on the photo on the right there with detectable warning devices, bicycle and pedestrian bridges, crosswalks, rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Again, you can there's a picture on the right there showing that, and bike lanes. So those are going to be the typical projects, though definitely not an all-inclusive list. Moving along here, just kind of wanted to highlight some of the previous successful projects that we've funded over the years in the program. So I'll just kind of go through these quickly. Up in Malta, we did a prefabricated ped bridge, as you can see there, across the Milk River. Livingston there, another pedestrian bridge. It was in conjunction with a shared use path for about a mile long. Extended an existing shared use path. Over on the upper right, Helena, you can see a crosswalk there and shared use path. The bottom left is Shelby. We did a bunch of sidewalk improvements there, so you can see new sidewalks and entrances to buildings that are ADA accessible. And then at the bottom, Conrad, just kind of some typical ADA compliant curb ramps for sidewalks. And then in the bottom right, you can see in Missoula again, crosswalks, ADA curb ramps, some curb and gutter and bulb outs, and then RFBs to go along with those crossings. If you're interested, there's also a list of a lot of our completed projects on our website. There's a list called completed projects if you want to go check those out. So matching funds, there's always a lot of questions on matching funds, and so I just thought I'd kind of highlight those here, kind of tell you how the match works. So as you can see, most projects will require a local match. There's definitely a few that won't, but if your project does require a local match, it's going to be 13.42% of the total project cost. TA, so the federal TA funding covers 86.58, so that's just the other piece of the puzzle there. If you add that to 13.42, it's 100%. So no in-kind match is allowed. It's cash match only. Some of the questions before of what funding can be allowed for match, and it's basically any funding other than federal funding. So the rule of thumb is federal can't match federal. And I'll go through a few examples here in a little bit. So tribal projects, if it's a project within the boundaries of a reservation, no match is required. So those projects receive 100% federal funds. And then moving along to, so you're probably wondering, well, which projects get state match? I can tell you that it isn't if you're on not necessarily if you're on a state maintained route. So all capital improvement projects, even if it's on a state maintained route, are still going to require that 13.42% local match. However, again, this is kind of confusing. If the project is on system, so on a state maintained route, and that project is upgrading or maintaining a project that was previously federally funded, so these are going to typically be your previous CTAP or RTP type projects. So upgrading, maintaining, that's going to be your pavement preservation projects. And ADA upgrade projects, which actually, if you're doing an ADA upgrade project, that's going to be a capital improvement. So anyway, getting into the weeds a little bit here, but hopefully that helps. The best way to think about it is if you're applying for pavement preservation, if it's on system, if it's on a state maintained route, and if that is a pavement preservation project that was on a facility that was previously federally funded. Again, that's going to be like the previous CTAP project that was done 20 years ago, and now it's going to need some pavement preservation activities. Those are going to receive state match. So definitely a little bit incentive there if you're looking for projects in your community that need a preservation treatment or something like that. There's definitely some opportunities there where you can not have local match. So hopefully that helps. Just want to highlight a little bit, so just, I guess, for example, just to keep it simple with the math, if you have $100,000 project, that's, if you do have local match likely, that's going to be 13,420 for your local match, and then the TA federal funds would cover that 86,580. We do get the question periodically that if a local government has, say more than the required local match, what to do with that. So if you really want to add in additional funding, that's going to be called local additional. And the thing to remember is you still will require, match will be required. So for example, this might illustrate it. So for a $100,000 project, let's say a community had an extra $10,000 they wanted to kick in. So that would just reduce the overall cost of the project by $10,000. So that would kind of come off the top. So our match is going to be calculated based off of $90,000. So if you do 90,000 times that 13.42%, your local match is going to be about 12,078 to be exact. And then your TA funding will be 77,922. The thing to remember is that 12,000 local match effectively gets added to that local additional. So you're actually looking at 22,000 out of pocket for that. So local additional is a little confusing. I can show you again when we get into the applications, kind of how that works. But I kind of like to advise folks that if you do have extra money, you might want to just kind of hold on to that in case there are projects that there are cost overruns, because those get handled proportionally. The TA funding covers the 86.58% of the cost overruns, provided that the local, if there is local match, can provide the additional funding as well for the local match. So if you have a little bit of extra funding, it's a good idea to hang on to that and not offer that up as local additional. Again, just some illustrations here. Kind of typical capital improvement project. PE stands for preliminary engineering. It's definitely not cheap. We typically see 25 to 35% PE costs based on kind of percentage as to construction. So CN construction, as you can see here, 250,000, 750,000 for construction engineering, also known as construction administration, just estimated there 125,000. So add all those up, that's your total project cost, 1,125,000. So the match for that is going to just be that 13.42%. So you're looking at just over $150,000. And then pavement preservation, similarly, same math, I guess, just lower numbers. So PE 20,000, construction 250,000, CE 10,000. All adds up to 280,000, and then the match is going to be about 37,000 there. Just to go over the timeline quickly here, kind of talked about this a little bit already, but applications are due on April 12th. Between April 12th and about August, scoring will be going on by MDT and the MPOs. So we have a scoring committee lined up, and we'll be tackling these kind of groups of applications monthly until we complete them. But I would imagine that by August we'll have all of them completed. Then they go to the MDT Transportation Commission for approval. That full list of kind of funded projects, they get to make the final say, and that'll happen in October of this year. And then as soon as they approve the list of projects, we can begin drafting and executing agreements between November and December of 2023. That's my best guess. It might take shorter or longer depending on how many agreements we have to write. And then after that, then we get into project development, which this is just starting project development, so it does take some time to get the funding programmed and to get consultants on board if that's the route we go. That takes some time, so that would happen between January and May of 24. And then, as you can see, bidding and construction is anywhere from 2025 to 2027. So, the smallest, simplest projects, maybe the pavement preservation projects would likely get constructed in the 2025 construction season, but those larger capital improvement projects might not be until 2027 or 2026 or 2027, or even further out if they, involve things like right of way and take some time in development. So. Moving along, just if you are in the MPO areas here, we have some contacts there. So Laura Maddox in Billings, David Gray in Missoula, and Andrew Finch in Great Falls. So you can drop those emails and numbers down if you want. They also have websites out there that I shared those links in MDT's information, so it should be out there. So that's that. What I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this, and I'm going to walk through some of the applications. So bear with me a second. So kind of wanted to go through the applications and just sort of walk through and provide some information. I don't think I'm going to say anything that's really not in the instructions, so that's the best place to start. Obviously, I alluded to earlier, there's two separate applications. There's the capital improvement one, as you see here. I'll go through the pavement preservation one next. They're very similar, but in order for us to keep it separate, because there are two separate pots of money, we need to have the two different applications. So again, let's start with the instructions. There's instructions, fairly detailed instructions for each application. So highly recommended to go along, follow along with the instructions as you fill out the application and refer back to that, because otherwise you might miss some stuff. So 1 through 3 here is pretty self-explanatory. You need to give your project a name, kind of typically as it's locally known, who you are, who the sponsor is, and then the contact information here for who the day-to-day contact is going to be. The next one here has to deal with if the project sponsor is a tribe, and that kind of has to deal with the cost table below. So if you select yes, then it says TA Federal share is 100%, no match required. If you select no, and it says match required, please enter state, local, or combination match. And I'll go through that here in a little bit. This is pretty self-explanatory. Project location, population, you have two choices. It's going to either be less than 5,000 or that 5,000 to 50,000. So the thing to remember here is, even if it's a county or something like that, that's maybe has a population of that 5,000 to 50,000 or even over 50,000. It's the location of where the project is at that population. So even if a county is applying for a project in a small town within the county, it's going to be the population of that town. So certainly could be that less than 5,000. Just to go through some of this cost table here, just to sort of show you how it works. I'm not going to go over how to prepare a construction estimate. That's something that you'll need to get in touch with an engineer about for your project. Someone that has experience in designing and overseeing construction and bidding similar types of projects that you're applying for. So that's the place to start, is developing a detailed construction estimate. I'll get into that later down in the application, but yeah, we're looking for a detailed construction estimate. That could be for pavement preservation, things like cost per mile or cost per square yard. But if you're doing a capital improvement project, it's best to itemize everything out with like typical bid items. You're going to have line items for for concrete or asphalt or gravel, even things like mobilization and traffic control and things of that nature. So I'm not going to get into that. That's the first step, is to develop your construction cost estimate. This here is just kind of the final product. So what is the overall cost of the project that we're considering? And then I'll just kind of walk through how this works. It's fairly self-explanatory, so I'm just going to kind of enter some typical numbers here so you can see how it works. 200,000 for PE. That's just going to do the math for you here and put a split of that 13.42%, and 173 for the TA amount. Just do 800,000. Of course, it does the split as well. 100,000 for CE. We'll just say right of way might be 50,000. IC or utility relocations might be 10,000. So kind of does the math for you. It's kind of nice. Then you have to come down here and select which type of match you have. So whether it's local match, and then it just kind of grabs this cost right here for the match. Says it's local match, and then estimated project sponsor cost there. Same thing with state match. Just puts it on a different line, and of course there wouldn't be a sponsor cost. If you do have a combination between local and state match, I'll just highlight that. That's not going to be very many projects, but you could theoretically have a project where part of it might qualify for a state match. Maybe some ADA upgrades, and part of it might not. So you just need to use a decimal over here. So let's go 2575, and then it does the split for you here, just to show how the tribal projects work. Just select yes there, no match required, and then it just does 100% in that column. So that's that. Just a high-level overview. Oh, before I move on, just to show one more thing, I'm going to go back to like local match. It's kind of our typical. Just so you can see what, if you like, I was trying to illustrate before, that additional contribution. If you do have that, let's say you have an extra $50,000 that you want to kick in, that is certainly allowed. You can do it. I don't mean to dissuade that by any means, but like I said earlier, might be better just to hang on to that and use it in case there are cost increases. But there's an ability there to throw in some additional contribution if that's desired. So that's how that works. Yeah, that's kind of all I want to cover there. So we'll keep moving along down through the application. Next up here, project description. You've got just a page. So this one is worth 10 points of the overall scoring, 100 points total. So what we want you to do here is just describe the overall project, be as detailed as possible, describe why the project is needed, where it is located, from where to where, and really kind of what are the details. So the scoring committee doesn't want to be left with questions. We want to know, well, how wide is the sidewalk or bike path or whatever facility you're applying for? What's the design criteria? How is drainage being accommodated if you're doing a shared use path on the kind of over on the ditch or side of the road? What type of surfacing is being proposed? Are you talking about asphalt or concrete? The costs are quite a bit different. So is there curb and gutter being added? Is there signing needed? Is pavement markings, kind of as detailed as possible. We kind of want to know, we don't want to be left with questions. So obviously it's a 1-page limit here. This is just going to really be your written version. An appendix can be attached at the end for things like, plan sheets, site photos, cross sections. The plans are definitely encouraged. Doesn't have to be super detailed, but having some drawings to indicate, what is being proposed is super helpful. Definitely some maps kind of showing the project location as well. Only include what's relevant. So if you think something's relevant for the scoring committee, please add that, but try to keep it as brief as possible as well. Moving on, here's some of the changes that we've made. Number 8 here is Americans with Disabilities Act ADA compliance. So this is absolutely important. At the same time, we didn't want to have folks spend a lot of time discussing it, because any project that we do with the TA program or any federal funding has to be ADA compliant. So, if you're applying for a new project, or an ADA upgrade project, most of them are just going to select this top button. Project will be ADA compliant. That's kind of going to be up to the engineers that will design the project to make that happen, and then in construction to ensure that it gets constructed properly. So basically, we're not going to do any project that isn't ADA compliant. So just trying to make it kind of quick and easy here. If your project has a technical infeasibility, that's going to be, someplace where it's just not feasible to, put in an ADA ramp at a crossing that is compliant. Everything is just too steep. Maybe uptown Butte. There's some pretty steep areas there. I know there's some technical areas with technical infeasibilities. So if your project has that, please explain below. We can, if your project is funded, we can certainly help you through those technical infeasibilities. That'll be up to the engineer and working with our civil rights folks to basically to document those. There isn't a lot of areas that will fall into this category. Most places you can make ADA compliant. Some are a little harder than others, but don't overthink this. If your project is going to be ADA compliant, select that top button and move on. No explanation needed. Next up, number 9 here, operation and maintenance plan. So, if your project gets funded and awarded and eventually built, the project applicant will be responsible for the project into the future for maintenance and operation of that facility. So here we just want you to describe, how the project will be maintained. Things like snow removal, mowing, repairs in the future, etc. Has your entity budgeted for these expenses? Do you guys have the personnel to perform the maintenance activities into the future? So, for most local governments, this is not too big of a deal. You either have equipment and personnel already in place, and just tell us how, if you're adding to that they're still going to be able to handle the maintenance. And then some sidewalks and things will be in residential areas that you guys might put the maintenance on the landowners, adjacent landowners. If that's the case, that is fine too. Just describe your ordinance that's in place that ensures that maintenance occurs. So that's that. Moving along. Again, those are non-scoring items. We kind of wanted to pull those out because typically we didn't put a lot of scoring on there unless it was completely not good. So you know, it is a pass fail if you for some reason don't, you know, for example, if you say that you're not going to maintain the facility, that basically means the application will fail. So don't do that. You need to make sure that the maintenance of the facility will occur. So moving on, project benefits. This is nothing new here, except that we've pulled out, or I guess we pulled out some of these, the ADA and maintenance are in the risk analysis, but project benefits, similar, except I guess we pulled out the project description from this. So the benefits we want you to describe, you know, again, why the project is needed, but what benefits will the project provide once this is constructed? So, you know, what are the safety improvements that are being made? How is safety going to be improved? You know, what are the problems today that you're solving? And again, what are the connectivity benefits? So, you know, kind of to have a little bit of creative writing here and kind of make a case and make a story for your project. Again, things like, you know, data, you know, bicycle pedestrian counts are really important when it comes to if you want to put in a crossing, or even if you want to put in a sidewalk or bike path, for example, on a narrow road. We just need to know, you know, why is this, you know, tell us why it's dangerous right now. How many people are using it on a daily basis or a weekly basis? You know, what's the roadway ADT? You know, if a road is really difficult to cross or something like that. You know, kind of want a lot of the detail here, but you know, really tell us, if this is constructed, what are the benefits? You know, how are we making this safer, and what connections are being made? Because that's really the focus of the program. You know, safety, accessibility, and connectivity. And again, that accessibility piece is the ADA talked about earlier. So safety and connectivity need to be described there. Moving along, risk analysis. There are 2 pages here, so a little bit more meat to this one. Things that we're looking for here are budget, matching funds, MDT coordination, public involvement, right-of-way, railroad, and utility impacts, and then some other risks. So I'll kind of briefly go through these. So this is where you're going to kind of describe how you created your cost estimate. So, you know, you can talk about who the engineer was that put it together, and how, you know, their experience with this, and, you know, kind of give a short, you know, brief explanation of how the cost estimate was developed. Did you include, you know, indirect costs? That's the IDC rate that MDT has for all projects coming through MDT. Was a contingency used? Was inflation used? Those sorts of things. So, you know, can be brief. You can provide an attachment that I would expect that to the end of the application, you know, showing that detailed cost estimate, but a little discussion here is helpful. Matching funds, you know, next, describe, you know, are your matching funds in hand? Do you have them ready to go? Have they been budgeted for? You know, tell us a brief description there. You know, typically, if your project is funded, we wouldn't ask for the full matching funds right up front. We just kind of kick it off with PE. So really, it's just that portion of the matching funds that is sort of due once we sign the agreement, and then you know, a year or 2 later, once we get into construction, we would ask for the rest of the matching funds there. So if that's something that is helpful, that you can say, you know, we'll provide the match, but you know, maybe we don't have everything today, but in a year from now, you know, we've budgeted for it and we're going to have X amount of dollars for the construction. That's kind of what we want to know. It doesn't need to be super detailed, but detailed enough to know that, you know, that the funds are there and ready to go when we need them. Next up, MDT coordination. This is really only for the on-system projects. So if your project is off-system, no need to call the MDT district administrator or maintenance chief. They're not too concerned with off-system projects. I mean, you can certainly pick their brain if you want to, but it's not required for this application. Their really main concern is, projects that are being applied for on the MDT system. Whether they approve them, whether they think it's a good idea. They're probably going to be concerned with maintenance, drainage, things like that, traffic operations. So be prepared if you're applying for an on-system project. Have a conversation with the maintenance chief, district administrator. They'll sometimes they're a little hard to get a hold of, but do your best. Meet out on site. That's probably the best bet. Meet in person. Go take a look at their project, and they'll definitely be advocates for it if they think it's a good idea. So anyway, enough on that. They're not required to provide a letter of support. They certainly can if they want, but really here we just want you to describe that discussion. Whether they approve it, whether they think it's a good idea, whether they're on board, all that type of stuff. Public involvement. A public meeting is required, though in the past it's been, sort of like very recently, public meeting. That's not the case anymore. If you've done a public meeting in the last, fairly recent past, I'd say in the last 5 years or something like that, if your project is part of an approved plan, that sort of thing that involved heavy public involvement, you don't necessarily have to go out to the public again, not to say that you couldn't, but anyway, describe all that, how the public's been involved. We definitely don't want to do projects that the public isn't in support of. We want to do things that the public wants, right? So things like letters of support from citizens, from landowners along the route, from groups in your community, whether that's bike ped groups or schools or law enforcement or whatever. Kind of be creative about that and letters of support. But they are helpful to the scoring committee to so we can kind of see how supportive the community is for the project. Next up, right-of-way and railroad. So here is, I can't stress enough how important right-of-way is, especially for capital improvement projects that might be expanding a facility, putting a shared use path on the side of a road or a sidewalk. Pay extreme attention to this. We've gotten, burned a few times in the past where, projects have said that right-of-way is not needed. And once you get into project development, it sure is needed, and then it becomes kind of a mess. So really pay attention to that. If you're applying for a shared use path, on a narrow right-of-way, that's a big red flag. MDT is certainly not scared of doing right-of-way acquisition. We do it all the time. We've got right-of-way agents in all of our districts, and MDT that's all they do. So what I can say is, if your project requires right-of-way, the best thing to do is talk to the landowners ahead of time. Make sure there isn't any big red flags. Certainly encourage letters of support from every single affected landowner if that's what you're up against. You certainly don't have to buy the right-of-way ahead of time. There's a separate phase for that. We can certainly handle that. But we want to make sure that we don't want to go to condemnation or eminent domain for these. We want to do we want to make sure people are on board, because those sorts of things take lots of time and lots of money. So hopefully that's not the case. Maybe your project doesn't involve right-of-way, which is even better. So anyway, I've droned on long enough about that, but it is a big focus of the scoring criteria. So make sure that you address that properly. Again, the appendix here is going to be great for attaching things like road road plans that show right of way or plats, um, things of that nature. Again, if you have preliminary designs done that can show the existing right of way, that's even better. Moving on to railroad, if your project is parallels a railroad or crosses a railroad, it's best to get in touch with them during the application phase here and make sure that they're supportive of the project. Dealing with railroads is also a challenge, so if you can get a letter of support from them, that would be great, especially if it crossing their tracks or something like that. Next up, utility impacts. Things like power poles, light poles, for above ground utilities. Below ground, you're going to be potentially dealing with telephone and fiber optic and water and sewer and gas and stuff like that. If your project includes excavation or going to potentially impact utilities, the best thing to do is get in touch with each of those utilities. Let them know about the project, see if they're on board. Oftentimes, if it's on system, there's a cost share. If it's off system, it's going to be typically on the utility to move that facility if it's in conflict. Oftentimes, with a sidewalk or bike path, they're going to want you to work around those. So the best thing to do is get in touch with all the utilities in the area, let them know about the potential project, make sure that they're on board. And yeah, if you can get a letter of support, that would be great as well. Again, you can talk about other risks as well. If there's construction or constructability type of risks and how you've mitigated them, or maybe your project is going to require traffic control. Describe how that's going to be handled during construction. If there's environmental impacts such as cultural type things, or if there are if you're planning on filling in a wetland or impacting a body of water or something like that, definitely want to kind of tell us about that and tell us how it's going to be handled. Again, MBT deals with all this stuff, so we're not scared of it, but we definitely want to ensure that we know all the risks ahead of time and kind of the plan for how they will be handled or how they will be mitigated. That's kind of the end of the application here. So the next step is, again, I've kind of talked about it a few times, is to attach an appendix. So, maps, photos, plans, right-of-way plans, letters of support, all that good stuff can be attached as an appendix. The thing to do here is to print this PDF to a flat PDF. You can't just attach files to this file due to the nature of the file, but there's instructions in the instruction guide that will help you do that. So print it to a flat PDF, then you can combine it with all of your other PDF attachments for your appendix, and then you can combine it into one file, and then once it's done, you can submit it through the file transfer service or file transfer system. I always forget what it's called. Again, there's a link on the instructions, but you can submit that into me with my email there. And yeah, that's it for capital improvement. Let's see, I'm coming up on an hour here, so I'm going to try to go through the pavement preservation one fairly quickly. There's a lot of crossover, so hopefully I can get through this without too much time here. So pavement preservation, switching gears again, looks very similar. As you can see, I'm not going to really go through number 1 through 6 here. Covered that on the last one. It's basically the same. Getting into project description here for pavement preservation. Again, describe the overall project, what is being proposed and why. Why is it needed? Specifically, like what treatment is being proposed. So if folks don't know, some examples of pavement preservation treatments, for asphalt are going to be crack seal, fog seal, spot dig out areas, repair of broken asphalt, alligator cracking, things like micro surfacing can be used, or slurry seal, or even up to an overlay if the path is in pretty poor condition. basically pavement preservation is everything from an overlay down. If the path is in such dire condition that the pavement needs to be ripped off and the subgrade needs to be, repaired or compacted, that's going to be more of a capital improvement project. So kind of overlay is kind of about the top end of the pavement preservation for asphalt. Examples of concrete repair, which are completely eligible in the pavement preservation application here. So spot replacement of broken heaved sidewalk panels, grinding of heaved sidewalk to remove tripping hazards, things of that nature. We're kind of talking about spot replacement here, spot fixes. We're not talking about a full replacement of a sidewalk, like a full block of sidewalk or multiple blocks. That's going to be a capital improvement project. And you need to apply over on that application. ADA can be upgraded with a pavement preservation project if it is necessary, such as overlaying a shared use path. Will require that path be brought up to ADA standards if it's not already. But pay special attention to the public road crossings to see if your project needs the ADA upgraded. So the kind of the curb ramps at those public road crossings need to be ADA compliant with truncated domes, and the slopes need to be correct. So if you have questions on that, happy to help and answer questions. Again, slight nuance here. If your project is just upgrading ADA, well, that's going to be a capital improvement project. That's not, we don't look at that as preservation per se. So that's going to be back with the capital improvement application. Again, I'm not going to go over this too much more. Talked about it in length before. The ADA section here, kind of pass fail, same with operation and maintenance. Same discussion from before. If you are applying for a pavement preservation project, for example, on an MDT facility that currently MDT maintains, we will most likely, MDT will continue to maintain that, but again, that's going to come out in the discussion with the district administrator and the maintenance chief. So again, just describe the maintenance plan moving forward, how the project will be maintained into the future. Get into the benefits here for pavement preservation. So again, describe why the project's needed, how the project will improve the surface condition, and possibly the safety if the current facility is in poor shape. What's the anticipated design life? For example, a fog seal, crack seal and fog seal might last 5, 6, 7 years, whereas overlay might last 20 years. Obviously different costs for those treatments, so kind of let us know, what the anticipated design life are. So a little less focus on safety and connectivity here, but still needs to be mentioned. How your project is improving safety, that might be, the project is also improving the ADA compliance, which inherently makes the crossing safer. And then, maybe reiterate if it's an existing facility, the connections that are being made. You don't need to go into great detail, but why is this a good facility? Is it well used? Where does it connect to and from? Who are the users? That sort of thing. Why is this an important facility to maintain? That's really it for that. Risk analysis. Similar to the capital improvement project, but a little different because these projects are quite a bit, less impactful, I would say. But again, budget still needs to be developed. Cost estimate, with an engineer that's used to putting these types of projects together, and using bid history and things of that nature. So describe how that's been developed. Again, attach that budget, cost estimates to the application, or the appendix rather. matching funds. Again, if your project requires local match, tell us, that you have it budgeted, that it's ready to go. Yeah, don't shy away from that one. If your project does have matching funds, we don't want that one to be kind of waffling around. If we need to be fairly solid that those funds are going to be there when we program PE and go to construction. Again, if your project is requesting state match, this is where you're going to describe the eligibility as well. Those things like on system, pavement preservation of a previously federal aid project. So kind of here's where we want you to kind of prove the fact that your project qualifies for state match. Again, public involvement. Project needs to have had a public meeting in the fairly recent past. Describe that. Any letters of support can be attached, but yeah, describe how the project has been discussed with the public. Any public comments, things of that nature are going to be important. MDT coordination, talked about that. Again, if it's on system, I'll have you coordinate with the district administrator, district maintenance chief. If it's off system, don't worry about that. It's they're not super concerned on if it's off the MDT system. They're not super concerned about that. Again, railroad and right of way. Hopefully, we're not dealing with right of way on an ADA project, but something to check into. Make sure that the right of way exists for the facility that you're on. Most of the time it does, but sometimes there's some surprises. So describe the right of way. Hopefully it's sort of free and clear and good to go. Same thing with railroad. Get in touch with them to see if they have any concerns. Hopefully get a letter of support from the railroad owner. Utility impacts, again, shouldn't be too big of a concern for pavement preservation projects, but there could be things like manholes, water service valves, things of that nature that need to be potentially adjusted or impacted slightly during construction. But tell us if there's impacts and how they're going to be addressed. Again, feel free to attach any relevant documents to the appendix. Anything that you think the committee will be helpful for the committee to consider your project at the end. Letters of support, construction estimate, any design details, things of that nature. I've talked about how to kind of finalize the application, attach that, and attach the appendix, and then upload everything to the file transfer service and send it to me prior to the deadline. So yeah, that kind of wraps it up. Hopefully that was informative, and yeah, I guess Michelle, we can probably open it up now to the question and answer. I'm going to go ahead and get back to my PowerPoint here.
All right, so the first question was regards into the application reimbursement for those folks who you mentioned were eligible for that. They're wondering better details on what is reimbursed in that application, those costs.
Yeah, so it's the for example, I guess the classic example is a community of whatever $3,000, 3,000 population. They would go out and hire an engineer to put together their application for them. Say that engineer charges them $6,000 to put the application together. They foot that bill up front. They have to pay their engineer, put the application together. They do the work. They, and whatever engineering firm ABC puts that together for them. That community submits an application to MDT. And then they have until June 30th of this year to basically, write a letter to me, email it to me with all the relevant information about, maybe there's 3 invoices that the consultant billed them for this application, you know, that kind of stuff. There's more info. There's a whole sheet on the app and on the website that kind of walks through it. But yeah, so I guess in that example, I said $6,000, so that the cap is $5,000. So we would receive that information from basically it's just a reimbursement request. So they send that information in and say, hey, we spent $6,000 on our application. You know, we're an eligible entity. We put in an application and we'd like to request $5,000 from MDT as a reimbursement. And then we would cut them a check for $5,000 and send them the check. So pretty simple. It's really what it sounds like. $5,000 cap. Now, if you don't spend that $5,000, say you hire an engineer for $3,000, you're not going to get the $5,000. We're only going to reimburse the eligible expenses. So in that case, you'd only, you know, say, hey, we hired someone for three grand, and here's the invoices that we paid, and you know, we would send a check for $3 grand. Hopefully that answers it. If there's more questions, you know, feel free to. I have my contact information up here. Feel free to give me a call or an email, and can certainly walk through your concerns and questions.
Awesome. So Karen Hilding has her hand raised, so I have given her the option to unmute.
All right.
Hi, yeah, this is Karen Hilding at City of Whitefish. And yeah, I have a question. So I've been working here at the city for 26 years, and you know, for many years there was a very robust Montana Safe Routes to School program headed up for several years by Taylor Lonsdale. And it seemed like several years to fill that position after he left. So one question is that position now filled? And it's pretty difficult, you know, when you Google that for state of Montana, nothing hardly comes up. So
yeah,
so we kind of wanted to get filled in on that, because unfortunately it seemed like in the past the towns were kind of working together on bike ped improvements and coordinating, and now it's more of like, you know, fighting for these dollars and trying to do this application for you know, formerly the Safe Routes to School application was very simple, and now it's a much more cumbersome process, and there's all these fees that get added on to the project. So anyways, that was some of my question. And like I say, I just look back on the years when we had Safe Routes to School funding and we had CTEP funding, and it was a more simple process without as many additional fees that got tacked on. But you know, I realize it's a new world now, but wanted to just see if the state is still running a more collaborative program like that.
Yeah, Karen, great question. I can speak to that. So yeah, there hasn't been SRTS, Safe Routes to Schools funding in over 10 years. So the best thing to do is contact your legislature, legislative folks in Washington, because that's, you know, you're completely right. There used to be dedicated Safe Routes to Schools funding. There isn't anymore. There hasn't been for 10 years. So that's not anything MDT controls. That's, you know, similarly to CTEP, that program went away 10 years ago and effectively switched to TA and became a competitive program, an application, basically a grant-based program, whereas previously it was an allocation to communities. So yeah, that's not anything MDT controls. We're just kind of carrying out FHWA's programs essentially. So I hear you. Yeah, it's a bummer that dedicated funding went away, but it's all transportation alternatives now. What I can say is there's quite a bit more funding this year. If you remember a couple of years ago, there was I want to say only 6.5 million available for TA, and now we have 30 million. So hopefully that does some good. We were able to get more projects out on the ground. Actually, what they did, what FHWA did, is made Safe Routes to Schools projects, or they made the activities just part of TA. So they would say, well, safe routes to schools exist, just part of TA, which is, I guess, true, but there isn't dedicated funding for safe routes to schools like there used to be. Again, what I will say is if you look at our completed projects, I would say probably almost half of our projects have been quote unquote safe routes to schools projects, projects very close to schools and providing safety improvements. Maybe not 50%, but definitely, I don't know, 30-40%. So those types of projects, safety improvements around schools, tend to score well. A lot of pedestrian activity, kids walking back and forth to school. The committees typically have a hard time saying no to projects that improve safety for kids. So yeah, great question. So
All right, so the next one, we'll go back to the Q&A chat box. Do grants from other organizations eliminate this one? And I'm not sure what that means.
Eliminate, I guess I don't know what that means either, but maybe they're talking about if they get a grant for match, something like that. If they get like a state or local grant or something, outside money that they could use for match for TA, that would be certainly allowable. The basic thing is they can't get a federal grant and match TA with other federal money, sort of thing. But maybe that person can contact me later and we can get, if that didn't answer your question, feel free to get in touch with me.
Okay, and then would mill and overlay still be considered a pavement preservation?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you're doing a mill, if that's the treatment, that's certainly a pavement preservation activity. A lot of times the thickness of the plant mix isn't, the existing pavement isn't all that deep. It's oftentimes a couple 3 inches or so. So there's, I think, some risk in that. Milling is oftentimes done on roadways with much deeper pavement sections, 6 inches or so of pavement, and you take the top couple inches off and you repave to keep that same surface elevation. But if that's the sort of preferred treatment, and if there's reason why doing that rather than just an overlay, that's certainly, I would say, an allowable activity in the pavement preservation set aside for sure.
So the previous question regarding the grants, they said, so for example, from Fish, Wildlife and Parks, so they must be talking about the recreational trails program, I'm thinking.
Yeah, and if that's the case, well, I think they have a few different grants. You'll have to ask them if it's federal or state, but I know that like the recreational trails program is federal funding, so that would not be allowable to use for match for TA. So again, ask that funding agency, what is the fund, where is this funding coming from?
All right, so now I'm going to move over back to the hand raising. So Jennifer, you are eligible to talk.
Hi, yes, thank you. My name is Jennifer McFarland. I work at Western Transportation Institute at Montana State University. And in regards to the safe routes to school question, I am starting to do a little bit of work with the local area schools, Bozeman School District, Montfortin School District, and possibly Belgrade School District for some non-infrastructure safe routes to school activities. So if there are entities out there who are interested, they can contact me. And you can find my contact information on the Western Transportation Institute website, or my email address is jennifer.mcfarland@montana.edu.
Thanks, Jennifer. I can chime in a little bit of that too. You mentioned non-infrastructure, and yeah, well, thanks for working on that. And what I will say is I didn't really highlight that in my presentation here, but non-infrastructure projects are certainly eligible. We haven't funded one through TA yet, not to say that it certainly couldn't be eligible. You know, I think the application is geared a little bit more towards infrastructure, but you know, if there's non-infrastructure ideas or projects out there, for those that don't know what that is, that might be, you know, education campaigns and things of that nature that are, you know, typically done like at schools and outreach and stuff like that. That's definitely an eligible activity. You know, we don't have a set aside necessarily for non-infrastructure. So I would say just apply with the capital improvement application. So.
All right, next question. If a project has been submitted for a funding request in the past, but was not funded, can the applicant get scoring feedback on the earlier application to improve a new application for the same project?
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead and contact me after this. Let me know what application that was, and I'll dig up our comments and our scores. I'm happy to help kind of tell you what you know, what the scoring committee didn't like, and how that application could be improved.
Awesome. Okay, so for first-time applicant, does MDT engineer and manage MPO projects?
That's a great project, or great question. So I'm going to answer that like a little bit more broadly for folks like the first-time applicant and others that might not know. But yeah, the TA program is a little different than a typical grant program, right? So typically you get a grant and the funding agency hands you a bunch of money and you go do your stuff and maybe do a report at the end. That's not the case with TA. Most typically entities, so the way to think about the application in and of itself is kind of a concept or a nomination. You're nominating a project to MDT. If that project is accepted or awarded, you are now basically a funding partner with MDT, and MDT kind of carries out that project. So we would typically hire a consultant to do the design and the environmental and all that good stuff. We'd oversee that process, make sure everything's federally compliant. We bid it through our normal bidding process. We're bidding projects at MDT every 2 to 4 weeks. Gets into the bidding cycle, we award it. We have a crew out on the ground that oversees the construction administration and the local government, or the applicant is a funding partner. So they never actually see any of the money. They get a project at the end of the day, and then they pay the local match. They pay MDT the local match along the way. That's the most typical way that most entities want the project to run. The question was more directed toward MPOs, and I'm going to answer it that actually any entity can apply to MDT to run their own project. It's called through the LAG program. It stands for Local Agency Guidelines. So you can become LAG certified. And I will admit that it's going to probably be the larger communities that have engineers on staff, right? Not the small ones that maybe only have, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 employees. So this is going to be your larger communities that have an engineering department that has the capability to handle a federal aid project. So not only the MPOs, but you know, even a non-MPO city or county could certainly apply to MDT. That's just a separate conversation. There isn't a place in the application to talk about that. But you know, I'd be happy to, you know, tell you more about that offline, or have that conversation. So yeah, it's getting into the weeds a little bit there, but yeah, kind of 2 different paths for a project to basically get constructed. Either MDT or the project sponsor can apply. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
All right, and then I should say that somebody did ask if they could download the application from the website, and I did provide that link, and I'll put it in the chat box too.
Perfect. I did hear that. Thanks for doing that, Michelle. I did hear a few folks that were having trouble opening the application. So if you have trouble, you can just email me, and seems like if you get it that application as an email attachment, it's easier for some folks to open. So anyway, it's just the program that we create that PDF from is kind of archaic, so causes some issues, but let me know if there's any issues with opening it.
And then the last question I have is HB 473 gas tax eligible to be used for construction cost and local match?
HB 473, I think that's the one where you can opt, it's like a fee that people can opt in. I think on vehicle registration or something like that. And then that money goes to like a pot of money. Anyway, sorry, thinking out loud. Yes, I believe so. I have to look into that a little bit more. I thought it was for maintenance only, but I could be wrong. It might be for capital improvement. The last time I checked, those pots of money were quite small. But looking at it from a match perspective, yeah, certainly. I think it can be because it's state funding. So yeah, should be no problem. But you'd want to look into whether it's for any bike ped facility, or it might even be for shared use paths only. So I think maybe the devil's in the details there. But again, contact me offline and we can work through that. We have folks at MDT that know more about that House bill and that pot of money than I do.
I believe that is the last question. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to write in the Q&A or raise your hand. I'm not seeing anything, so I think we're good.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. Yeah, glad there was some good turnout, and thanks for all the questions. If you do have more questions, my contact info is there, so I try to respond pretty quickly. So yeah, again, thank you for listening, and hopefully this was informative. And yeah, I can just say that if you are interested in applying, and especially if you haven't applied before, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to try to provide guidance. I can try to steer you in the right direction on your application. So yeah, thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.